Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting conference. I certainly regret not being able to join you in person for this event, but I will try to do my best to introduce to you the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, its origins, its purpose, function, and status, briefly its content, and we'll spend some time on the way it can be implemented. These are the two publications I'm going to refer to. The blue one, issued in 2001 in the European Year of Languages by the Council of Europe, the original Common European Framework, and its updated and expanded companion volume to your right, published in 2020. This is the agenda I have in mind, starting with the origins, aims, status, function, and use, and then focusing more on the key aspects, key messages, and elements of the document. Originally, I was planning to have a discussion following my presentation on trying to answer questions like, is this document can be used as our common language, can be used as our common European standard, should it be used as a reference, or can it be also used as requirement? Let's start with the origins, status, and function. To begin with, it's important to state that the two documents are language education policy documents of the Council of Europe. For some people, it's confusing because there are at least three European councils in a way that may be mixed up. The first one, the Council of Europe that we are going to refer to here, may be sometimes confused with the European Council, which is a body of the European Union, and another body of the European Union, which is the Council of the European Union. So, as you see, it's easy to confuse these organizations. The Council of Europe was founded in 1949. The political aim was to invite countries to cooperate in order to prevent any future wars in Europe. As we know, it has not necessarily been successful, this ambitious plan, but the countries that joined this organization are still doing their best to follow the original aims to promote democracy, human rights, and the rule of law across Europe and beyond. And it's important to note that almost all states of Europe are members in this organization. The exceptions are the Russian Federation, for obvious reasons, and Belarus. The Council of Europe has paid attention to several issues of languages, considering them being important for democratic developments, for human rights, as well as for the rule of law. Issuing international treaties or agreeing on adopting those, such as the European Convention on Human Rights, mentioning the right to use your language, the European Cultural Convention, encouraging member states to promote learning and studying of languages across the borders. The most important or strongest document related to languages is the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages, but also the Framework Convention for the Protection of Minorities is mentioning languages as an important part of this protection of minorities. These are international legal acts, meaning that if countries sign and ratify these documents, that means that it's a law that they have to translate it into local laws on their territory. Not so with recommendations and resolutions that are just recommendations adopted and resolutions agreed upon, but they have no binding powers. And attached to many of those, there is a number of policy documents and references that the Council of Europe is offering in order to implement the treaties and the recommendations. The European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages is, as I said, the strongest language-related treaty that the Council of Europe has adopted. It was open for ratification by member states in 1992 in order to protect and encourage use of minority languages and to protect local cultures. The UK has ratified this charter in 2001, protecting a number of languages under this law, among them Welsh as well. There is a number of recommendations and resolutions related to languages, and I would like to draw your attention to the one on the use of the Council of Europe's Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, because it's a useful sort of explanation what the meaning with the publication of such a document was at the Council of Europe and how the Council is recommending it being used. It's important to underline that this recommendation does not say that you have to use, it's not recommended that the framework is used. However, the recommendations focused on the way of its use once institutions or countries have decided to use it. So in other words, how to use it properly and in agreement with the intention of the authors and the Council of Europe itself. There are two institutions at the Council of Europe, two units in charge of languages. One is based in Strasbourg, the main site of the Council of Europe, and one is based in Graz, in Austria, at the European Center for Modern Languages of the Council of Europe, which is an interesting institution supported by part of the membership of the Council of Europe. Unfortunately, the United Kingdom has withdrawn from this agreement. This was, I dare to say, that was the first Brexit, if you want. The origins of the CFR date back to the 60s, where the Modern Languages Project was started. The work of the experts engaged by the Council of Europe led to a proposal called European Unit Credit System for Modern Language Learning by adults to begin with, in order to offer sort of a way to use language learning to overcome the division that the European continent was experiencing at that time. The political aim was maybe not so successful. However, the content-wise, it was quite a success because it introduced a functional, notional framework that was an invitation to move away from the old-fashioned grammar translation method-based language teaching and learning towards more communication, more communicative approach. And the examples were first elaborated for English in form of threshold level descriptions that were developed for consecutive levels in language development. The idea to offer some common language that could promote language learning and at the same time promote democracy and human rights and the rule of law in the membership was in after 1989, where the division that the European continent experienced since World War II was sort of no longer valid. And the idea was taken up again, and now the concept was turned to a framework rather than a modular approach in order for the stakeholders to understand better how they operate, and to promote cooperation among educational institutions, as well as provide a basis for the mutual recognition of language qualifications. But in the first, as I understand, the aim was to assist learners, teachers, course designers, examining bodies, and educational administrators to situate and coordinate their efforts to better understand what the others are doing. The key elements, the key parts of the framework for language learning, teaching, and assessment was, in the first instance, the comprehensive descriptive scheme of language use as language learning, and language learning as language use. So now the use of language was put in focus in form of activities, strategies, and competences that underlie the use of language. This was illustrated by a number of can-do descriptors, simply descriptors that would exemplify what kind of activities, what kind of strategies, and what kind of competences underlie language use at levels that were possible to scale in a Swiss research project led by Brian North. That led to the offer that we now know as common European reference levels from A1 to C2, probably the most popular part of the framework. In the end, or overall, the idea was to offer common meta-language for all those involved in language education to facilitate communication, networking, mobility, recognition of courses taken, examination passed, and certificates granted. This is, on one slide, the framework indeed. It starts with indicated that language used is based on certain general competences called savoirs in French, starting with knowledge, going over to know-how, savoir-être indicating personality traits, and savoir-apprendre meaning the skills to learn and the cognitive processes underlying it. The language use was described in terms of communicative language competences and communicative language activities and strategies. Activities and strategies were put forward as the most important result of language learning and the most important part of language use, with competences underlying and providing quality to the quantity of activities and strategies that a person can perform. In terms of common reference levels, several tables and scales have been offered in this document, starting with the most popular global summary scale, where the reference levels have been summarized in short descriptions. A more developed way of indicating the level of language ability was offered in terms of a self-assessment grid, where learners could evaluate themselves how much they are able to do in this or that language and how well they're able to perform. And this whole framework of scales was equipped with a huge number of illustrative descriptors accommodated or presented in subscales in ranking way attached to the reference levels. These are the levels as they appeared to be feasible when the ranking of the descriptors was analyzed. As you see, it's maybe not so revolutionary because it reminds ourselves of the old-fashioned division into levels, beginning, intermediate, and advanced. However, the descriptions were far more action-oriented than in the previous descriptions of this kind. This is an example of one global scale descriptor for B1. This is what describes language use on a level that is called B1, and with an attachment to it that it's a characteristic ability of an independent user. This independence, as you can see, is rather restricted to traveling in an area where the language is spoken rather than just living there for a longer time. But these four descriptors summarize what should be or may be expected of a language user in order to place him or her on this intermediate level. This is the more detailed descriptor that is providing more concrete examples of language ability. For example, to be able to take part in an informal discussion. It means to take an active part in informal discussion in familiar context. This descriptor can be turned to learning aim, teaching curricula goal, as well as can be taken as a basis to design tasks for assessment. And this goes with all these descriptors in the same way. I have highlighted here the notion of native speaker, which has been much under discussion after the publication of the framework in 2001, and in the updated version, in the companion volume of 2020, the native speaker notion has been abandoned, replaced by proficient speaker, in order to stop the discussion who really is a native speaker of that language. This is what the new companion volume in 2020 offered, in addition to the issue from 2001. The scales were revised and updated. A new level of reference has been added before A1. So sort of it was felt that A1 was already quite difficult to begin with. A number of sign language descriptors were developed in a project led by the European Center for Modern Languages in Graz, and was attached to the description of natural language use. New scales were developed, validated, and added, as well as the grids or tables supplemented by what is now probably much needed, online interaction and mediation, as well as phonology or pronunciation under the qualitative features of spoken language. A number of examples of use were also offered in this companion volume. What is probably the most striking and mostly discussed part of the companion volume is a very comprehensive description of mediation as a mode of communication that was only mentioned in the original version of 2001, but now was fully supplemented and equipped with a number of descriptors in order to illustrate what mediation is all about. New scales were then offered, mediation activities and strategies, all in all 24 new scales, some new and badly needed descriptors for using telecommunication, but also bringing back the literature to the descriptions, as well as expanding on the notion of plurilingual and pluricultural competence. Now, let's focus a bit on the implications for language education of the CEFR and its innovation message. To summarize, in my view, these are the key messages of this new approach to language learning, teaching, and assessment. In the first instance, it's offering a socio-cognitive model of language use. What it means is that language use has been put as language learning. Before this way of reasoning, we rather would think that language learning is in preparation for language use. But the authors of the framework, and specifically those that are behind the companion volume, underline this very heavily, that it's not entirely useful for language education to consider language learning in schools, for example, as a preparatory phase. Rather, language use should be already at the start of the process, and every act of learning should constitute act of language use of a person, indicated here as a social agent, meaning a person living here and there, having certain personality traits, having certain experiences, having certain living in certain contexts, and all this is determining their language use as language learning. The second aspect is the action-oriented approach, which means that it's the language use is always intentional. We use language in order to achieve something, to do something, we expect something to happen, and language is our instrument to make it happen. So the language learning should be focused on real life tasks, should provide an opportunity for language use situationally and internationally authentic, meaning that it should appeal to the users, to the learners. It should invite them to identify with the tasks set, to find themselves really engaged in language use that is offered as the way to learn a new language. And equally important is the proficiency perspective that the framework has been promoting, is promoting, to switch, to move from deficiency perspective, focusing on what learners cannot yet do, to rather what they already can do and what else they would want to be able to do. The shift is also indicated by the way the activities are being conceptualized. We all have been using the so-called 4 skills notion: listening, reading, speaking, writing, as covering all aspects of language use. However, this new way is inviting us to look anew at the way language functions and is being used. In a receptive mode, when we listen and try to understand, when we read and try to understand, when we produce something, when we speak or when we write, but also when we interact while speaking, or in a written exchange. And the fourth mode of communication proposed here to replace the old four-skill scheme was mediation, as indicating that language is many times an instrument to mediate in speaking or writing between people and between texts. And this is what probably we all are doing when we use language. We mediate between people, ourselves and the others, and also between texts, referring to them, summarizing them, etc. This is an example of the full set of scales and descriptors. Here, an example of production. As you see, the mode of communication to produce speech or text is further described in those scales related to other more concrete activities and strategies for that matter. This is how a scale looks like for overall oral production. As you see, descriptors from the lowest pre-A1 level to C2 level, the highest in this scale, indicate the ability of summarizing what it means to be able to use language in oral mode at this or that level. The main function of such illustrative descriptors may be summarized or may be understood as helping to align curriculum, teaching, and assessment, because they describe what people can do in the real world. And this is the action orientation. They can inform planning, curriculum development. They can also serve as a basis for designing classroom activities, and they also serve as a tool to design assessment tasks. This alignment between curriculum, the description, the delivery in terms of teaching, and the assessment of the outcome is something that is being indicated as something very desirable, to have all three elements aligned to the same or based on the same principles. Otherwise, it may be difficult to reach the educational goals if curriculum is not in agreement with teaching, or the teaching is not in agreement with assessment. So the CEFR can be used as a tool to assist the planning of curricula, the planning of courses, and the planning of examinations. And the idea or the proposal is to start with what the learners as language users need to be able to do in the language that is offered. And the can-do descriptors can be a huge help in this. And it can be also then used as a framework for all three parts of the educational endeavor. The action orientation is being stressed over and over again in this framework, from focus on language to prepare to perform a task, to focus on performing a meaningful task or action to learn language. While performing a meaningful task, people learn language much better than when they just practice on some artificial situations that they hardly identify with. In 2005, I was conducting a survey on behalf of the Council of Europe, trying to find out how the framework is used indeed. It was 4 years after it was published and already was very successful. This was very interesting, because I don't think the Council of Europe, the authors, expected this to be such a bestseller. By the year 2005, it was the framework published 4 years ago was already translated into a number of languages, not only European languages, and it was really very quickly adopted by several both private and public institutions. In this survey, and I'm presenting this excerpts of the results, we found something that I still consider valid, because I don't think this has much changed since then. Certainly, the best known parts of the framework are the scales of illustrative descriptors, most of them the global scale and perhaps also the self-assessment grid. And it's not new, and it hasn't changed since, that the CFR seems to be most useful and most frequently used in the domains of testing, assessment, and certifications. Institutionally, the CFR is still, I think, most useful, considered being most useful by examination providers. This was the survey in short, where we found that the reference to the CFR may be found in a wide variety of national documents, and it has already then 2005 evidenced for significant impact on language education in several institutional and state contexts. In terms of curriculum development, what we found was that there's still need for further dissemination, further guidance and training, and there are still areas where further development would be desirable. And this is why the revision and update of the framework was undertaken later on. In terms of teacher education and training, it was found to be useful for defining proficiency of teachers to begin with, and it was considered that could be useful for cooperation at international level. And as I said, testing and assessment was the most popular section when survey questions were answered. CFR-based examinations were attempted in most countries already by then, however, indicating how complex it is to relate tests validly to the CFR levels. So, all in all, more guidance and training was indicated as an urgent need. The other context that we could examine at that time was the area of textbooks and materials. You may find an array of textbooks bearing the signs that they are based on the CFR, indicating the common reference levels, and also in their content orienting themselves on the way the descriptive scheme of the CFR is describing a language ability. In summary, it was, and I think it still is, considered to be useful as a reference tool. However, its full potential was not, and I don't think it is already yet fully realized, which means that there's always a need for more reader-friendly accompanying materials, more guidance, and more training. In general, the CFR seems to be widely used by both public and private providers that offer modern foreign language courses and still language assessment organization. When people go for examinations, when they ask for language certificates, they seem to be interested to be informed of a CFR level indication of this or that given certificate and outcome of an examination. Seemingly, the CFR alignment increases transparency in the courses offered, certificates issued, and recognition across borders of educational systems. However, there is a number of principles and challenges related to the use of the CFR, and I have summarized those on these two slides. To start with, it's important to remember that the CFR is purely descriptive. It cannot be considered or understood as a prescription, as a norm to follow with no further restrictions, because the framework is language neutral. There's no concrete language in the descriptions offered within the framework, which means that it needs to be applied and interpreted and adopted appropriately with regard to each specific language. It is context neutral, which means it needs to be applied and interpreted with regard to each specific educational context in accordance with the needs and priorities specific to that context. The CFR attempts to be comprehensive, but in no way it is to be considered as full and closed description, because language knowledge, skills, and use are taken under consideration, and the claim to be exclusive or fully developed in terms of every local language and context is one that should not be attempted. There's always room for further elaboration and development, and further actions in this direction are welcomed. It's important to note that the framework offers a common language. However, it only should be considered as an invitation for stakeholders to reflect upon and critically analyze their existing practice, and to allow them to better situate their efforts in relation to one another. It should contribute to increased transparency, improved quality of provision, and comparability of outcomes. And in the end, because we are speaking of the Council of Europe, it should contribute to the promotion of the basic educational values for which the Council of Europe stands, such as social inclusion, intercultural dialogue, democratic citizenship, language diversity, learner autonomy, and lifelong learning. In conclusion, is the CFR our common European language? Well, based on my own experience, I may say yes, to some extent, maybe in some places to a great extent. It has become our common language, and it goes also beyond Europe. We can have equally interesting conversation when we speak to our Japanese or Chinese colleagues, because they know of the document, they have their own language versions, and they are also interested in applying the principles offered within the framework. Is it our common European standard? Well, it depends how we understand the notion of a standard. If we understand this as a quality indication, then I should say that it can serve as such instrument to improve the quality, to provide a shift from language education that used to be to a more modern way of doing things. I can only say that in Poland, the use of the framework the translation of the document and the use of the framework contributed to a huge shift in our way of teaching languages at schools, really providing the ground for a shift from the old-fashioned grammar translation method to a more communicative approach. Is the CFR a common reference or requirement? Well, it was conceived as reference. However, many places it becomes requirement because by the decision of certain institutions or bodies. Whether it's right, well, I would refer again to the recommendation that I mentioned at the beginning. If you decide to use it and require its use, then you need to be aware of how it's to be done, not to sort of ruin the ideas that are behind and the intentions that were originally accompanying the development of the framework. You may find more interesting references and sources on the new Council of Europe website devoted entirely to the framework and its implementation and the promotion of its approach, with a number of background documents and resources, with descriptors base, database of descriptors, easy to search, with lots of ideas for implementation, as well as an interesting set of samples of spoken performances calibrated to the CFR levels, illustrating what it means to be able to speak in French at this or that level, in French or other languages. A project that I would like to draw your attention to, this one, relating language, curricula, and tests and examinations to the framework, is something that the ECML, the European Center for Modern Languages in Graz, is offering, organizing shops on demand, going places and assisting people in just this, relating their activities to the framework. But the Association of Language Testers of Europe can also be used as a resource center, for example, with manual for language test development and examining for the use with the CFR, as well as this quite new publication, the Handbook for Aligning Language Education with the CFR, as well as other resources such as this collection of case studies, how institutions and bodies were trying to align their tests with the CFR, as well as some more wider perspectives on the concept of action-oriented, plurilingual, and intercultural education that is behind the framework. More information you find on these three web pages, and I strongly encourage you to check these. And this is all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. And dziękuję Państwu za uwagę. That was my Polish. I don't dare to use Welsh yet. Thank you.